This happened in October of 2022. I remember the date clearly because it was the first time in years that all four of us managed to take time off work and actually plan something together. Jared, Chris, Nolan, and I had been friends since high school, but after college we all scattered into different cities, different careers. Life just happened. But out of nowhere, Jared texted the group chat one evening. "Boys, I'm taking a long weekend. Let's do one last camping trip before winter kicks in." We all jumped on the idea instantly. Nolan offered to find a spot. He'd grown up in Montana, and his dad used to be a hunting guide, so he knew places that weren't on the typical tourist maps. He suggested a location called Crater Ridge, deep in the western Montana woods. He said it wasn't an official campground, more like an old hunter's trail with some clearings around a lake. No signal, no noise, no people, just wilderness. We met up at Jared's place on a Thursday night to load his Jeep Wrangler with everything we needed. Tents, food, camping stove, water containers, a couple of hunting knives, and even a flare gun, just in case. Chris brought his camera gear. He was into night photography and said he wanted to get some astrophotography shots away from light pollution. I packed most of the food and our first aid kit. Jared brought the firewood. Nolan printed out an old topographic map of the region and marked a trail with a red pen. We hit the road early Friday morning. Once we left the last gas station on the highway, we were driving through winding mountain roads surrounded by endless pine trees. After a while, the paved roads ended, and we had to take an unmarked dirt trail that twisted through thick forest. Jared kept asking if we were still on the right path, but Nolan insisted he remembered the way. After nearly 40 minutes of bouncing around on that uneven trail, the trees opened up to reveal a small clearing beside a quiet lake. It was perfect. The water was still and glassy, and there was a decent flat area just big enough for our 2 tents. We parked the Jeep and immediately started setting up camp. It was peaceful in a way that's hard to describe, unless you've been somewhere completely off-grid. No humming traffic, no planes overhead, just the sound of wind moving through the trees and the occasional splash of a fish breaking the lake's surface. By evening, we had the tents set up, firewood stacked, and dinner cooking over the flame. It was one of those moments where you feel completely disconnected from the world, but fully present with your friends. We stayed up late that night, sitting around the fire, sharing beers and swapping stupid stories from high school. At one point, Chris grabbed his DSLR and tripod and started shooting the night sky. You could see every single star out there. No light pollution, just a canvas of darkness and dots of white and blue. Jared even joked that if we didn't die of bear attacks, we'd probably die of peaceful boredom. Eventually, we all crawled into our tents. The temperature had dropped a little, but we were prepared with sleeping bags and thermal gear. Nolan and I were in one tent, Jared and Chris in the other. At some point, deep in the night, maybe after 2 or 3 a.m., I woke up. Not suddenly, not because of a nightmare, but because something felt off. Like the air inside the tent had gone heavy. I stayed still for a few moments, thinking maybe it was just me waking from a weird dream. But then I heard it. Footsteps. Not quick or panicked. Slow, deliberate crunches on gravel right outside the tent. At first I told myself it could be a deer or some other forest animal, but the way the steps moved, back and forth, slow and heavy, almost like someone pacing just outside, it felt human. I reached for the flashlight next to my sleeping bag and froze when I saw Nolan's eyes already open. He had heard it, too. Neither of us spoke. We just stared at each other, listening. The sound stopped for a moment. Total silence. And then came again, but this time on the other side of the tent. The hairs on my neck stood up. We hadn't heard anyone drive up. We hadn't passed a single soul on our way in. This place was miles from civilization. I mouthed the word, bear. Nolan just shook his head slowly. His face looked pale in the dim moonlight leaking through the tent fabric. Then something, or someone, brushed against the tent wall. Not violently, just dragging along it slowly, like fingertips trailing across the nylon. My breath caught in my throat, and then without warning, everything went quiet again. I don't know how long we laid there in total silence. 5 minutes? 10? It felt like forever. The only sound was the occasional creak of the trees swaying outside. We didn't hear the footsteps anymore, and nothing brushed against the tent again, but neither of us moved. Finally, Nolan leaned in and whispered, "Do we wake the others?" I nodded. Slowly, carefully, we unzipped the tent. The cold air hit us instantly, and the forest around us looked calm, still, and undisturbed. The moonlight was bright enough that we could see the lake, the jeep, and the other tent across from us. We tiptoed over and unzipped Jared and Chris's tent. Chris woke up first and looked annoyed. Jared sat up behind him, rubbing his eyes. Before they could say anything, Nolan gestured for them to be quiet and whispered, "There was someone outside our tent." They both froze. We huddled near the campfire pit and explained everything. The footsteps, the pacing, the brushing along the tent wall. Chris said he hadn't heard anything, but Jared mentioned he had woken up at some point and thought he heard water splashing near the lake, but figured it was just a fish or something. We stood there in silence for a while, all of us listening, scanning the tree line, waiting for something, anything. But it was just still and quiet, like nothing had ever happened. Chris suggested maybe it was a bear or an elk, but Nolan was already shaking his head. Number bears don't pace like that, and they don't brush gently against tents like they're trying not to be heard. None of us really had a better explanation. Eventually, we threw a couple more logs on the fire, sat around it for a bit to calm our nerves, and then decided to head back into the tents. Jared and Chris took the first watch with a flashlight, promising to wake us in a couple of hours if anything weird happened. Nolan and I laid down again, but neither of us slept. I just stared at the ceiling of the tent, listening for even the slightest sound. My brain was trying to convince me it had been some animal, but deep down, I knew what I'd heard. Those footsteps were too slow, too careful. That was someone. We made it through the rest of the night without any more incidents. Morning sunlight broke through the trees, and for a brief moment, the feeling of unease lifted. The guys were already up, boiling water for coffee. Jared said the watch had been uneventful, and Chris swore he didn't hear a thing all night. We tried to brush it off and salvage the rest of the trip. After breakfast, we took a short hike along the ridge that gave the area its name. It was beautiful, honestly. Jagged cliffs overlooking a small valley with red and yellow leaves scattered everywhere. The kind of view that makes you forget how tense the night before was. By late afternoon, we were back at camp. Chris took more pictures. Jared collected firewood, and Nolan and I went to refill the water containers from a stream nearby. It was maybe a 10-minute walk from the campsite through a narrow stretch of woods. The stream was shallow but fast-moving, fed from snowmelt up in the hills. While we were crouched down filling the bottles, Nolan suddenly stopped. "You hear that?" he said. I paused, holding the bottle under the stream. At first I heard nothing but the water. Then a snapping sound, like a dry twig being stepped on. Then another. We both turned toward the trees behind us. Again, nothing. Just still woods. No animals, no wind, no voices. but the air felt different again, heavier, like it had the night before. That pressure, that eerie stillness that makes your gut twist, even if you don't know why. We filled the bottles as fast as we could and headed back to camp without saying much. That night, we didn't joke around the fire. We barely even spoke. Everyone felt it. The air had changed again. Even Chris, the skeptic, seemed on edge. He kept shining his flashlight toward the woods between stories, then claiming it was just to see if any cool animals were around. But when we finally turned in for the night, Jared quietly locked the Jeep and put a hatchet next to his sleeping bag. Everyone felt it now. We weren't alone out there. I don't know exactly what time it was when I woke up, but it was still pitch black. What woke me wasn't a sound. It was the feeling, that suffocating heaviness again, like something was wrong, like we were being watched. I looked over and saw Nolan was awake too. His eyes were wide open, staring at the ceiling of the tent. He whispered, barely audible, "It's back." I held my breath and listened, and then just like the night before, crunch, 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 footsteps. Again, slow, deliberate, walking the same path around our tent. This time, though, it didn't just circle once. It kept going, over and over. Each pass felt slower, closer. I thought I saw the fabric shift slightly, like a hand brushed against it again, just like last time. We didn't dare make a sound. Then, silence. No footsteps. But I could hear something else now. Breathing. Right outside. Slow, deep, and uneven. Almost wheezy. Nolan and I just stared at each other, frozen. I was gripping my pocket knife so hard my hands started to cramp. Then suddenly, tap. It was faint, but unmistakable. A tap on the tent fabric. Another tap, then dragging. Something like fingers. Slowly running down the nylon wall of our tent. I was sweating bullets. My heart was pounding so loud I was sure whoever was outside could hear it. Then a new sound. It came from the other tent. "Hey, who's out there?" Jared's voice, loud and firm. The footsteps scrambled away. Not ran, but fast, deliberate steps into the woods. Jared and Chris burst out of their tent with flashlights, sweeping the beams around the site. Nolan and I bolted out, too. I nearly tripped trying to get my shoes on. We all stood there, flashlights shining in every direction. Nothing, just trees, just shadows. "Did you see them?" Chris asked. "No," Jared muttered, "but something was here." I heard it. We didn't bother debating anymore. We packed. Right then, in the dark, threw everything in the Jeep. Half the stuff was just shoved in without even being folded. None of us cared. We were done. By the time we hit the trail, the sky was starting to lighten. But that feeling, that wrongness, followed us the whole way down. We got back to the parking area around 7 a.m. The only car there was ours. No other campers, no other hikers. We'd been alone up there, or we should have been. We never talked about it after that. Not in detail, at least. Jared made a joke about bears. Chris blamed it on sleep deprivation. But I know what I heard, what I felt. Weeks later, Nolan texted me a screenshot from a Reddit thread. It was titled, "Weird Stuff Near Bear Ridge. Anyone else experienced this?" The post described almost exactly what we had experienced. Footsteps, tent tapping, breathing, and a shadowy figure spotted near the water. It had dozens of replies, all of them describing similar stories, some dating back 10, 15 years. One guy even claimed someone went missing up there in the 90s. Never found. We never went camping again after that. Not because we're scared of the woods, but because now we know. Sometimes, when you think you're alone out there, you're not. This happened in late October 2019, just outside the town of Libby, Montana. My cousin Jake and I had planned a weekend camping trip as a way to reconnect. We'd both been busy, me with college, and Jake with his new job working long hours at a welding shop. So this trip felt like something we both really needed. Jake had a contact from work who told him about a spot called Kessler Bridge, deep in the Kootenai National Forest. It wasn't on any park brochures, no cell signal, no man-made campsites, just a river, a rotting wooden bridge, and miles of untouched wilderness. Locals say it's cursed, the guy had told him with a grin, but it's probably just bears. Bring a rifle. We laughed it off. We were used to Montana wildlife, and we both had sidearms just in case. The idea of a cursed bridge, it just made the whole thing sound cooler. We were young, cocky, and had watched too many horror movies without ever believing in one. We left early on a Friday, drove past Libby, and turned off onto a series of winding logging roads. The directions were vague, things like turn left at the fork, where the ground flattens, and follow the trail past the mossy tree stump. But Jake had been raised in rural Montana and had a good eye for landmarks. We arrived sometime in the afternoon, and sure enough, there it was, Kessler Bridge. It looked like something out of a nightmare, a collapsed, splintered wooden bridge stretching halfway across a narrow river. The wood was gray and soft with rot. Half of it had crumbled into the water. On the far side, thick pine forest with no visible path. We set up camp on our side of the river, just up the bank and back from the tree line. The air was crisp, and the only sounds were the occasional bird call and the rushing of the river. That night was uneventful. We cooked over a small fire, cracked open a few beers, and stayed up talking. Jake told me stories about work, near misses at job sites, and a coworker who swore he saw something in the woods near his hunting cabin. I shared some of the weird stuff I'd seen on campus, like a guy who believed Wi-Fi was mind control and only wore tinfoil hats. It felt normal, safe, peaceful even. But as we got ready for bed, I couldn't shake a weird feeling. It started with this odd smell. Not strong, but something off. Like waterlogged earth, mixed with rust. I thought maybe it was just the river. Jake didn't notice it, or pretended not to. He was already half asleep in his sleeping bag by the time I zipped the tent closed. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up. I didn't know why at first. It was cold. The fire had died out. I sat up and listened. Then I heard it. A sound I'll never forget. A low creaking, like wood groaning under weight. From the bridge. I froze. It wasn't just one creak. It was rhythmic, slow, measured. Cray-yeek, pause, cray-yeek, like someone or something was walking across the old, rotting planks. Jake stirred beside me, whispering, "You hear that?" I whispered back, "Yeah, someone's on the bridge." He sat up too, eyes wide. We stayed completely silent, listening. The footsteps, if that's what they were, stopped. For a full minute, there was nothing but the sound of the river. And then, the most unnatural sound I've ever heard. A laugh, high-pitched, childlike, but wrong, off-key. It echoed across the water like it came from under the bridge, not on it. Jake muttered, "Screw this," and unzipped the tent. He grabbed his flashlight and stepped outside. I followed with mine, my heart racing. We swept our beams toward the bridge. Nothing. The bridge was empty. The trees were still. The river moved as usual. There are no tracks, no signs. Maybe it was a bird? I offered. Jake just stared at the bridge. Then he said something that still sticks with me. That laugh. It came from the water. We stayed outside the tent for a few minutes, scanning the trees, listening for any movement. But everything had gone completely silent. No insects, no wind, just the constant sound of the river slapping against rocks. Jake lowered his flashlight and whispered, "Let's just get some sleep." If it was an animal, it's gone now. Neither of us really believed that, but we were cold and tired. We climbed back into the tent, zipped it shut, and left the flashlights within reach. I didn't sleep much. Every sound outside felt louder than usual. Every creak of the trees made me flinch. Jake must have passed out eventually, but I lay there until the black sky outside started to fade into gray. When we stepped out in the morning, the campsite looked normal, except for one thing. Our firewood pile had been disturbed. It looked like someone had rifled through it. Logs scattered, some placed in a weird triangular shape near the river. Jake just stared at it. That wasn't us. I shook my head. No way. And the laugh. You heard it too, right? He nodded, looking more unsettled than I'd ever seen him. Let's eat and figure out if we're staying another night. I agreed. But deep down, I already knew we shouldn't. We spent most of the day hiking on the side of the river that was accessible. No trails, just dense forest and animal tracks. A couple of times we thought we saw something move between the trees, but it always turned out to be a deer or squirrel. Still, the tension didn't leave us. We didn't talk much during the hike. It felt like the trees were listening. Late that afternoon, we came back to camp. That's when we noticed something else. Across the river, on the other side of the bridge, there was something hanging from a tree. At first, we thought it was an old piece of trash, but when we looked closer through Jake's binoculars, we saw it was a doll, a homemade one, twigs wrapped in cloth, no face, just black thread tied around its head like a noose, and underneath it, footprints in the mud, barefoot, human, and fresh. We didn't talk. We just looked at each other. I felt cold, not from the weather, but from the realization that we weren't alone out here. "Let's pack up," Jake said. His voice was low and steady. We began putting out the fire and rolling up our tent when something made me stop. There was movement. Across the river, near the bridge. I looked up, and I swear to God, someone was standing there, at the far edge of the broken bridge. A figure, pale, still. No visible clothes, no face I could make out. Just standing there, partially obscured by branches. I whispered, "Jake." But by the time he looked, the figure was gone. He didn't see it. But he believed me. That's when we made the call. We're leaving. Now. It was only about 5 p.m., but the sun was dipping behind the mountains fast. Jake rushed to secure our gear while I kept watch. I couldn't shake the image of that figure, standing silently, like it had been watching us the entire time. And then, the smell returned. That same smell from the first night, rot and rust, stronger this time. I turned toward the river, and I kid you not, the water near the collapsed part of the bridge looked darker, almost black. Jake shouted, "Let's go." We loaded up the last of our stuff, strapped our bags, and practically ran for the truck parked back up the dirt road. As we moved away from the river, I swear I heard something behind us. Not footsteps, dripping, like water falling. Not from the river, but from somewhere higher. I turned around. Nothing there. But just before we rounded the bend, Jake looked back and went pale. "There's something crawling on the bridge," he muttered. "Fast. Too fast." We didn't look back again. We just ran. We didn't stop running until we saw the outline of Jake's truck through the trees. It was already getting dark. The air had this weird pressure to it, like a thunderstorm was coming, but there were no clouds, no wind, just that smell again, strong and thick, like rotting meat soaked in metal. Jake fumbled the keys, and for a second, I thought we were going to die right there. But the door clicked open, and we jumped in. As he started the engine, I looked through the windshield back toward the trail. There was something standing at the edge of the trees. It was far, but close enough that I could make out its shape. Too tall to be a person. Its arms were too long. It didn't move, didn't even twitch. Jake didn't see it. He was too focused on peeling out of that dirt lot. But I stared until it vanished into the tree line. I never told him what I saw. We didn't talk during the drive. Not even when we got back to the main road. Not when we stopped for gas. Not when I finally got dropped off at my apartment. I could tell Jake wanted to pretend like none of it happened. A few days later, he texted me one line. "I'm never going back there." Neither am I. But that's not where the story ends. About a week after we got back, I started hearing dripping sounds in my apartment at night. At first, I thought it was a leaky faucet, but it wasn't. The sound came from inside the walls, then under the bed, then outside my window. Drip, drip, drip. It would go on for hours. I even called maintenance once. They couldn't find anything. And then about a month later, Jake called me. His voice sounded off, strained, like he hadn't slept. He said, "Man, do you ever feel like something followed us back?" I didn't answer. He continued, "There's muddy footprints on my porch in the morning. Bare feet, just one set." He paused, then added, "I live on the 3rd floor." That night I locked every door and window, but when I turned off the lights, I still heard it. Drip, drip, drip. It's been over a year now. Jake moved states, deleted his social media. Last I heard, he started seeing a therapist because he thought he was being watched all the time. I never went camping again, not even a short hike. I still don't know what we saw across that broken bridge, or what crawled across it the second night. But I do know this. Some places don't want to be found, and sometimes they follow you home. This happened back in the summer of 2018, when I was 29. I had just left a long-term relationship and needed to clear my head, get away from the noise. So I took a week off work and decided to go solo camping. Not something I'd normally do, but I needed the silence, the kind that only nature could offer. There's a place in northern Idaho my uncle once told me about when I was a kid, a spot he called the Hollow. He used to camp there with his army buddies in the 70s, said it was the quietest place he'd ever been. No cell towers, no people, no roads, just you and the trees. That sounded perfect to me. I used topographic maps to try and pinpoint where it might be. After about 2 days of planning, I loaded my gear into my SUV and drove out from Coeur d'Alene, heading north into the backcountry. Most of the drive was uneventful. Long stretches of winding dirt roads, a few abandoned gas stations, no cell service after a while. I parked at the edge of an old logging trail that looked barely used. From there, it was a 5-mile hike into the woods. The path got narrower, branches scraping my arms, bugs constantly buzzing around my ears, but there was something peaceful about it, too. The deeper I went, the more the world seemed to fall away. When I finally reached the hollow, I understood why my uncle always spoke about it in this almost reverent tone. It was a natural clearing surrounded by hills on all sides, almost like a shallow bowl carved into the forest. The trees around it were tall and straight, like sentinels. The grass was oddly even, soft underfoot. In the center, there was a massive boulder with strange, faint carvings, almost like weathered symbols. That should have been a red flag, but I just thought, cool, maybe Native American. I set up my tent near the edge of the clearing, made a small fire, and ate a quick meal. The sun dipped behind the hills faster than I expected. Within minutes, the hollow went from golden and serene to cold and unnaturally quiet. No crickets, no birds, just wind. That night, as I lay in my tent, I felt the kind of stillness you only get in remote places. Not peaceful stillness, tense stillness, like the trees were holding their breath. I told myself it was just because I was alone. I wasn't used to the sounds of nature, or in this case, the absence of them. I eventually drifted off to sleep, the kind that's so deep it feels like you're floating. I don't know what time it was when I woke up. The fire had gone out. The only light came from the moon glowing faintly through the mesh of my tent. And then I heard it. A dragging sound. Not footsteps, not branches snapping. A slow, deliberate dragging. It came from the far end of the clearing. At first, I thought maybe it was an animal, but the sound had rhythm, like someone was pulling something heavy across the grass. I froze. My mouth went dry. Every instinct in me told me to stay quiet. I reached for the hatchet I kept next to my sleeping bag and held it against my chest, barely breathing. Then came a voice, low, croaky, male. I couldn't make out the words at first. It sounded like a prayer or chant, repeated in a hushed, raspy loop. That's when I realized it wasn't just one voice. There were several. They were chanting in unison, slow and deep, like some kind of ritual. My skin crawled. I peeked through a small opening in the tent's mesh, heart pounding. That's when I saw them. I held my breath and squinted through the thin mesh of my tent. Just beyond the tree line, at the edge of the clearing, stood 4 figures. They were barely visible in the moonlight, tall, cloaked in dark, tattered robes that fluttered with the light breeze. Their faces were hidden beneath deep hoods, but the faint glow of their eyes pierced the darkness like embers. They were moving slowly, dragging what looked like a large, heavy object covered in cloth. The dragging sound was louder now, scraping the grass with a rough, grinding noise. As they chanted in that low, guttural voice, I could hear occasional words, old, forgotten language, like something out of a nightmare. I wanted to scream, to run, but my body was frozen. The weight of the silence around me was suffocating. Suddenly, one of them stopped and lifted the cloth just enough to reveal what they were carrying. It was a human-shaped bundle, wrapped tightly in stained, rough fabric. My mind screamed to wake up, but the terror was real. I grabbed my phone to call for help, but no signal. Of course, no service out here. The chanting grew louder. The figures formed a circle, placing the bundle carefully on the ground in the center of the clearing. Then they began a slow, synchronized movement, hands weaving through the air, fingers tracing strange symbols glowing faintly in the moonlight. My heart pounded so hard I thought it would burst. I thought about running. Maybe I still could, but every time I tried to move, my legs felt like they were sinking into the earth, heavy and unresponsive. Then the bundle started to move. A soft groan escaped from the fabric, like someone struggling to breathe. The chanting stopped instantly. The cloaked figures looked toward the tent, their glowing eyes fixated on my trembling shape. I scrambled backward, finally breaking the paralysis, and ran as fast as I could into the dark forest. Branches lashed at my face and arms. Roots snagged my boots. But I didn't stop. Behind me, I heard footsteps, slow, heavy, following me through the trees. I didn't look back. When I finally reached my SUV, I fumbled with the keys, hands shaking. I started the engine and floored it down the dirt road without a glance back. That night, I drove all the way back to town, never stopping. I didn't even sleep. For weeks after, I couldn't shake the feeling that those eyes were watching me. That chanting echoed in my dreams. I asked my uncle about the hollow when I called him. He went silent for a long time. then told me something chilling. There's an old legend about that place. They say it was used by a secret cult years ago, disappeared without a trace. People say the hollow is cursed, a gateway. If you disturb it, you don't just leave it behind. Since then, I haven't camped alone. I still hear the dragging sound in the wind sometimes, and I swear those glowing eyes are watching from the shadows. Even though I've tried to put it all behind me, the memory of that night keeps creeping back in. After I got home, I started noticing strange things around me. Small, inexplicable signs that made me question everything. First, it was the smell. A faint, musty odor, like damp earth mixed with burning leaves, would suddenly fill my apartment. No matter how many times I opened windows or sprayed air freshener, it lingered. I started smelling it whenever I was alone, especially late at night. Then the nightmares began. In my dreams, I'd find myself back in that clearing, standing before the robed figures. The chanting echoed louder and louder until it felt like it was coming from inside my own head. The fabric-wrapped bundle would twitch, and I'd see flashes of pale skin and wide, terrified eyes. Sometimes I'd wake up gasping for breath, drenched in sweat, heart racing like I'd run miles. I told a close friend about it, hoping talking would help. But then the friend disappeared. No calls, no messages, no trace. It was like they vanished overnight. I don't know if it was a coincidence or something else. The silence around their absence felt too heavy to ignore. I tried going back to the hollow once to prove to myself it was just some freak accident. But when I reached the outskirts of the forest, I found the trail completely gone, overgrown and swallowed by nature. No sign anyone had ever been there. Months later, I started hearing rumors in the nearby towns. Campers and hikers who went missing, strange lights seen in the forest, eerie chanting carried by the wind. No one dared to investigate, and those who tried ended up never coming back. That's when I realized the hollow was more than just a place. It was a warning. Sometimes, when I'm alone at night, I still hear that dragging sound faintly outside my window, like someone or something is moving slowly, waiting. I don't know if those robed figures are still out there, or if the curse followed me home. All I know is I'll never camp alone again, because some places aren't meant to be found, and some secrets should stay buried.